So my next guest, I actually wanted to ask him some questions about something that, well, a judge has told him he's not allowed to talk about. So I'll avoid. So, you know, there's this, well, we got the Antifa people in town. And my next guest happens to be the Attorney General of the state of Georgia, who's engaged in dealing with the Antifa people, but a judge has said nobody can talk about the case right now. So I want to, before he comes on stage so he can't be blamed by anyone saying I'm bringing it up, before he gets here, I just want you all to know I wanted to ask about this, and I know some of you submitted questions about it, but there's a gag order from a judge, so we can't talk about that issue. However, what we can talk about with Chris Carr, Georgia's Attorney General, is he's one of the attorneys general who has spent a lot of time suing the Biden-Harris administration to stop their interference with states between environmental regulations and issues with immigration, with crime, you name it. There's been so much. An attorney general for a state typically deals with so much of the interests and affairs of a state, and yet dealing with the Biden-Harris administration for so many states has become a full-time job as they try to force states, which under the Constitution are these semi-sovereign entities, to actually just be a Walmart subsidiary of a federal government, as opposed to their own autonomous, unique entity. So I do want to spend a lot of time talking with him because he really has led the fights for a number of states. Look, and I realize I got to say this lovingly for my friends in Kansas City and elsewhere. Your Attorney General running for election, been spinning out a lot of press releases, taking a lot of credit for a lot of lawsuits, but the guy who initiated a ton of those lawsuits that every other Attorney General is taking credit for happens to be Georgia's Attorney General, my friend Chris Carr.
How are you, my friend?
I'm good, how are you?
Thank you, man. I'm doing great.
So, what's it like to be a pain in the ass for the Biden administration?
Well, it's great, but Eric, first of all, you know, I'm a heavy metal guy, and I always tell the greatest first lady in America and the best governor in America, I need to be opening up for you. I should be the Motley Crue to your Metallica, okay? That's how I feel like it should be. Look,
hey, Charlie, from here on out, when he shows up, Inner Sandman will be the theme.
I want it to be my walk-up music. That'd be great. Eric, literally the activists in the Biden and Harris administration wake up every day and give us something to sue them on. I mean, let me give you a list. Just a quick list. Title IX, we won. Student loan bailout, we won. Waters of the U.S., we won. SEC climate disclosure rule, where literally they want companies to give weather maps to show how they've impacted the climate, we won. Parent school and public meetings, Second Amendment, immigration, catch and release, remain in Mexico, unionizing farm workers and mandated wage increases, Georgia's Election Integrity Act. Let's not forget, the Biden-Harris administration is still suing Georgia over SB 202 from 2022 after we've had 2 statewide elections, local elections, and it was a cut and paste from Stacey Abrams' failed lawsuit and all of her campaign ads. They still are suing us over that. And then we've got energy independent issues and the Clean Power Plant rule, which is to, you know, what they want to do away with coal-fired power plants and natural gas, which again, Governor Kemp just talked about economic development. You have to have some of these things. Again, the reason we're successful is because we have low cost, low energy sources. But the Biden administration, again, they wake up every day and do this. And why? You know, and Eric, I spent time in Washington. If Congress isn't going to get things done, nature abhors a vacuum. That vacuum gets filled by the federal executive through regulation and executive order. So again, Congress doesn't push back. Who in our federal system can do it? It's the states. And as the chief legal officers for our states, we're in the best position to work with our governors and to work with others to push back. But think about it. You know, again, it's like Governor Kemp talking about the pencil. Remember, Leon Panetta said, you know, strike the pen or the law of the land or whatever that may be. Well, that's what they're doing. And when you've got higher grocery prices for every time we go to the grocery store, you've got gangs that are recruiting kids that are younger and younger in our schools and across the country. You've got a border that is not secure, so we're seeing fentanyl human trafficking gangs come across the border. What does the Biden administration and the Harris administration focusing on? Making sure that biological males can compete in women's sports. That's what happens when they get to do this.
So It's not just that. You mentioned energy. I didn't even get a chance with Governor Kemp to talk about nuclear energy. You've got the environmentalists using the Biden-Harris administration coming into our states, as you mentioned, and just it's wrecking economic policy. So how do you, as an attorney general and the other attorneys general in the country, balance out your role as a law enforcement officer, a legal representative for the state, with also working with the other entities that are affected, whether it's the private sector or the public sector?
Well, I think it's I say it's my obligation to defend the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution, the laws of the state of Georgia, and represent the interests of the people of our state. Those are the individuals and the citizens of our state, but also businesses that are doing it the right way. That's part of it. And again, we don't see business as the enemy in the state of Georgia. You know, one of the ways that we've seen, if you can't get something passed in your legislature, you can't get something passed by Congress, go weaponize your state AG. And oftentimes, you know, somebody told me at the first bipartisan AG conference I went to, you know the power you have, and remember, anybody uses the word power, they abuse that word, okay? You know the power you have, you can call a press conference and drop a company stock 20%. Well, why in the world would I do that? But you have to be able to balance that out. And yes, it's our job to look at the laws of our state. But like I just said, as Congress, and I got to commend the Speaker. I think Mike Johnson's done a great job getting some things passed. And Leader McConnell's got a challenge because we got to get the Senate to get some things done. But if Congress isn't going to do it, the administration is going to continue to pass these executive orders and regulations. And who runs the executive branch? It's usually political appointees. So it becomes a political process. They're going to always overreach because they're trying to get a political a bump from this. And the student loan thing is a great example. They know they can't do that. We've beaten them twice. But it's one of the most brazen political moves I have ever seen. So you have to be able to balance that. And I think from my perspective, I'm glad I spent the time 10 years in Washington with Senator Isaacson. All these issues I just mentioned, for the most part, we dealt with while we were there. I'm glad I was at economic development because I see the impact of laws on our state. And again, we don't see business as the enemy. We see the transformative nature of the free enterprise system. And then now as AG and really expanding kind of from the criminal, you have to be able to balance that and to be able to work with AGs around the country. Look, my Republican AG colleagues and I say we're the last line of defense against the Biden-Harris administration and liberal policies. And we take that very seriously. It's a point of pride.
So I can ask you this, and I can legal nerd out with you a little bit on this. How does the dynamic after Looper Bright change your ability to take on Washington? After Looper Bright gets rid of Chevron.
Well, so to me, again, at the federal level, we've been pushing this for a long time. And again, I never understood why the courts would defer to the executive branch on what is a fundamentally judicial role, which is interpretation. So I don't think at the end of the day, I think we're going to actually see probably some more lawsuits, but it's been aligned in a way that I think makes more sense for the judicial branch to provide its interpretation and not just relying on the executive. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see. Some folks think it's going to end lawsuits or it's going to reshift it. And I think what it's going to be is it's going to put the judiciary in the proper role of interpreting what are the words on that page. Not what a bureaucrat in the executive branch, on Pennsylvania Avenue or Constitution Avenue says, but what was the intent of Congress, which is supposed to be the first among equals.
So let's shift, because when a lot of people think Attorney General, they think crime. And you entered into a situation where we had a mayor in Atlanta for a while who basically threw the police under the bus, had a massive spike in crime in the city. A new mayor who came into Atlanta and told the police, do your job, crime starts going down. But in that void, there was a time where the governor was having to bring in more state police into the metro Atlanta area to quell crime. But you yourself in your office had to step up to play a larger role in not a civil lawsuit role, but a criminal enforcement role. Can you talk about how you as a state officer can fill the void when there's failure at the local level?
Absolutely. And Eric, I think you got to go back to 2020 to understand, which, as you mentioned, was during the term of the previous mayor, but also 2020 is when a lot of liberal DAs got elected, okay? And the new criminal justice reform post-2020, a little bit before, but certainly then, on the left, was don't enforce the laws that I don't like. Well, that is a violation of oath of office. It's a dereliction of duty to have one executive or judicial branch member say, I don't like the law, so I'm not going to enforce it, undermines the American system that we have. It completely ignores the rule of law. But that's what we saw. We saw it in San Francisco. We saw it in LA. We saw it in St. Louis and Baltimore. We've seen it here in Georgia, in Athens, in Atlanta, and around the state. So that was the new criminal justice reform. But I will say, going back to the Constitution of the state of Georgia, Article 1, Section 1, Paragraph 2 says the paramount duty of government is the protection of person and property. So that means I don't care where your race, gender, sexual orientation, where you live or where you're from, you deserve to be safe. But what was happening is a lot of these folks were saying, I'm not going to do it. And if you don't like the law, that's fine. But run for the legislature. Run for Congress. That's how we change laws. So instead, in Georgia, we did it differently. And again, because of the governor and the legislature, thank heaven for having a governor that cares about protecting all people and a legislature that does as well. 2017, we added domestic terrorism, which you mentioned coming in. 2019, human trafficking, 22 gangs, and 24, we now have organized retail crime because all Georgians deserve to be safe. And if DAs aren't going to do their job, then the state needs to come in. If you look at those issues, they're all kind of multi-jurisdictional. They're where the gangs don't care what the city or county line are, human trafficking, that type of thing. But think about this, Eric. Who are the communities most often terrorized by gangs and violent crime? Lower income, racially diverse, immigrant populations. Who are the communities that are most often impacted and vulnerable to human trafficking? Lower income, racially diverse, immigrant populations. You talk to the governor about school choice. Who are the communities that are most often negatively impacted when you don't have an opportunity at an education? Lower income, racially diverse, and immigrant populations. My friends, it is us, conservatives and Republicans, that are the cavalry. We're the ones that are coming and bringing the ideas. We're the ones that are protecting people no matter where you live or where you are in this state. And we're the ones that are providing opportunities. We should be proud of that. We need to be screaming that from the rooftop because that's the success that Governor Kemp was talking about, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
Now, you steer yourself where you need to go because I know there are some legal rulings as to things you can and cannot talk about, and I'll avoid the one specifically I know. But you mentioned the organized retail crime. And if I can step out of your role as Attorney General and just look around the country, I've kind of been shocked at the initial media dismissiveness of the idea that there was some organized, non-organic wave of retail theft that was happening. We've seen it here in the state and around the country. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it does not appear to me to be as organic as the media would have you believe it is.
No, and so let's go back. When I started talking about human trafficking, folks were saying, nope, you're making this up. This is a boogeyman. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. And we've proven it, and we now have a unit. Last year, we rescued and assisted 129 victims. And that, I'll tell you that. And give First Lady Marty Kemp a lot of credit. What she did with the Grace Commissions, bring everybody together so we can talk about it and rescue those kids. We start talking about gangs. Governor Kemp was running on it back in 2018. I run on it. Folks on the left, the media said, you are making this up. Well, we come out with a survey that says, that was done by the Georgia gang investigators. Asked all 159 counties, do you see evidence of gang activity? 157 said yes. Know what that tells me? 2 counties lied. Nobody wants a gang in their backyard, but they can see when there is, and they want to know that the cavalry's coming, that there's a plan, and we're doing something about it, and that's what we're doing. And now it's the same with organized retail crime. Now you see people saying, well, this is just simple shoplifting or here or there. But when you have cities that are saying, we are not going to arrest you if you steal up to $900, what do you think is going to happen? So every single day, you saw somebody going into a CVS or a Walmart or a Home Depot, whatever it may be. What we know is organized groups are going and hitting brick and mortar retail and selling that online. Used to be you go to the pawn shop. Now you go online. So I had a great retailer in Georgia show me how they had a group of people hit every store coming down 75, going over the top end perimeter, up 85 into South Carolina. We've got a company that produces commercial pallets for Amazon and Walmart and others, found hundreds of thousands of dollars of pallets in the desert in New Mexico. Anybody's a golf fan, I'm reading Golf Digest the other day, people going into pro golf to PGA Superstore, grabbing drivers and putters and putting them online, genuine parts, you name it. And again, when the CVS or the Walgreens or the racetrack or QT, whoever leaves a community, which communities are most often impacted? Lower income, racially diverse, and immigrant populations. So I think if we're going to be the #1 state in the nation to visit, which I'm so proud of, and again, we continue to do all the things that need to be done to do that, part of that is also protecting companies that are doing it the right way, their employees and their customers. Because when you see those videos online of somebody running into the Home Depot, usually it's an employee that's getting knocked over or a customer. And we got to do something about it, which goes back to the original question that you asked me, how do you balance it? Yep, we got to take care of our people and our businesses.
So, and this is, again, I don't coordinate these conversations beforehand. Everybody kind of flies blind, as do I, coming in to see where the conversation goes. There have been a couple of instances in the state now where companies have punished employees over shoplifting. What's your thoughts on that, and is there anything that the state can or should do in that situation?
Well, that bothered me at the beginning. And then I got talking to the companies. What was happening is, again, employees were getting hurt. Employees are hired to be associates. They're hired to sell something. They're not hired to be deputies. And so I now understand, no, we should not put employees in harm's way. But Eric, what I would also encourage our businesses and our corporate folks to think about this. Don't fire somebody for trying to stop a criminal. That's the other side of the coin. People were getting fired for for taking pride in their business. So what I think we need to do is, again, we are putting the resources in this organized retail crime unit. We're organizing and coordinating with federal, state, and local law enforcement. We're going to raise awareness on this, but I do think it's incumbent on law enforcement to handle this issue and keep companies and employees and customers safe. And I'll say this, whether it's gangs or human trafficking, now organized retail crime, we're kind of on the front edge as a state, and I'm really proud of that. Some states have, human trafficking units, not a lot of them. Some have gang units, not a lot of them. And organized retail crime is one that we're on the cutting edge. I'm proud of that for the state.
You mentioned the two counties without gang issues. When I was on city council down in Macon before I'd gotten there, our former mayor had disbanded the gang task force. And because there was no gang task force making gang arrests, he could say there was no gang problem in the county because the gang task force was not arresting anyone. It's interesting how you skew that data. But then that leads me to human trafficking, which was the issue why I ran for office. And there was a tie-in to gangs. And when you mentioned people saying it's not really happening, there is this view out there that people on the right overplay as a moral panic, human trafficking. Yet Congressman Roy, who will be here tomorrow, he was doing a live interview, I think last year on TV, when the Border Patrol pulled over a vehicle that had people like in the trunk who were human trafficking victims. It is happening, and it seems like there is this corridor along I-20 from Texas through the southeast where this is an organized issue that isn't an abstract. You mentioned the data, that this seems to be international, not just local.
It is. And so part of why Georgia is the #1 state in the nation to do business is our logistics network. Ports, airports, roads in particular. We are 2 days by rail and truck and 2 hours by plane to 80% of the U.S. market. That's why we're as successful as we've been. But criminals can also use that network, like you just mentioned, whether it's coming across I-20, whatever it may be. So again, we don't stop investing in logistics, we stop the criminal activity. And in part, that's training. And if you start looking at law enforcement training from the police department level, sheriff's department, you name it, the Grace Commission has done a lot on that. I think that it's critical that we do that. There's two different types of human trafficking. There's domestic minor sex trafficking. There's sex trafficking, we focus on domestic minor sex trafficking, adults buying kids for sex. And then there's labor. And the governor has put money into the GBI to focus on labor trafficking as well. We've focused on it too, but there's no doubt. And folks used to say, wasn't Atlanta the #1 place for human trafficking? Well, nobody knows the numbers because our numbers have been higher because we started prosecuting it earlier. So it's kind of the opposite of the Macon situation. Oh, and by the way, I see my friends from Athens who are here. We were told when we came into Athens there was no gang problem. No gang problem. We've indicted 21 individuals because there's a gang war going on in Athens. And we're not leaving Athens until there's a district attorney that agrees to prosecute those cases because the people, I'll take that round of applause back there. Absolutely. But it's also why we have to coordinate with our law enforcement partners nationally at the federal, state, and local level. And there is, like I said, there's something going on in Georgia. As I go around the country, people say, how do you get federal, state, and local law enforcement to work together? Well, we've done it differently. I've got a Georgia anti-gang network that we put together, first time ever, 2017, get federal, state, and local law enforcement talking. Because it's amazing what happens when human beings will actually talk with one another. You can solve some problems.
Yeah, amazing. So let me
I'll take that round of applause too.
Let me ask you about the Athens situation. We had the situation with a very progressive attorney there, and there was the death of Laken Riley. And there has been a lot of, I guess, federal state squabbling over the situation and also how that local community can navigate with a district attorney that doesn't just represent Clark County, but Oconee County as well, right, where the people are way more interested, it seems, in having a law and order DA. How do you, as a statewide elected official, balance those interests? And can you talk, or any update that you know of on the Laken Riley prosecution?
No, my interest is on keeping people safe. Mm-hmm. My interest would be on Laken Riley and her family. And Eric, let's be clear. The Biden-Harris administration, the federal government, failed Laken Riley and her family. Law enforcement in New York failed Laken Riley and her family. And the sanctuary city policies of Athens, Clark County failed Laken Riley as well. And those progressive members of that commission that were on there in 2019 that were cheering being a sanctuary city can pretend that they're not one anymore all they want. They know they are. The policies that they adopted were along those lines, and they were cheering it on. But that being said, we can handle gang cases. So I would have been glad, proud for our office to make sure that justice was done for Laken Riley. The DA in Athens, though, did turn the case over to the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia. They have a great gang investigator that has the case, and I am confident that Laken and her family are going to get justice.
Good. Before we get out of here, you mentioned the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. We've got the situation with the Fulton County suit involving the former president, which is on appeal, whether or not that'll be moved. And a lot of people say that Chris Carr, the Attorney General, gets to have this role that I think people don't realize you don't necessarily have the role of you get to say, hey, I'm going to send it to this guy or that guy. There is actually a council that does that. Poor old Mitch Scandalakis, I guess, is actually Pete has to deal with this. Can you talk a little bit about how that council works?
Yeah, so the Prosecuting Attorneys Council, great partners. They organize the DAs and the solicitors, but they also have statewide authority to be able to handle some of the cases. When there is a conflict, years ago, our office was happy to handle the conflict cases because it was basically just administrative. And then I told you in 2020, you got a lot of criminal defense attorneys that were liberal that became prosecutors that took over DA's offices around the state. I think the first year we had the authority to handle these cases and find conflict counsel, we had like 26. And in 2021, it was up to like 475. And what happened is you had a lot of these new DAs that were giving us all these cases to conflict out of. But the only way it works is these DAs have to be willing to take somebody else's case in order to balance out the conflict. But it started becoming a political issue. So I went back to Pete and I said, Pete, look, we're happy to help, but we're not going to be a political prop for anybody. It really makes more sense because the Prosecuting Attorneys Council has statewide authority. So now we're one of the entities that can get cases. You can give it, the prosecuting attorneys can keep it, another DA could take it, or solicitor. If it's a solicitor, our office, if we have jurisdiction. But I'm very clear, I think putting us in the position of taking a case that we don't have the expertise in, bad for everybody. Or you could hire a private practitioner as well. But, and one of the things I should have said too, Eric, going back, talking about this and talking about the DAs that got elected, Kamala Harris is the leader of the progressive DAs around the country. She goes back to San Francisco. She's the one that was friends with all of them in San Francisco and Los Angeles and Chicago and St. Louis. And again, I saw the governor laughing about the new ad about the border. But boy, you talk about somebody that was all about sanctuary cities and defunding the police and cashless bail. It's Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yeah, it is. Now, I got to ask you probably the most important question of the day. How is your wife? She's much better half than you.
She
smarter, better.
Absolutely. She is great. She's doing fantastic. She was chief of staff to 3 U.S. senators. Way cooler than me. She's doing great. She's going to be so glad to know you said hello.
Yes, absolutely. So, okay, now, as we wind down here in the last few minutes we have, Attorney General in Georgia, if you could look to the future, with the legislature convening in January, what's your big issue that you think the legislature needs to consider that can help your office?
Well, I want to thank the governor and the legislature for giving us these resources to fight domestic terrorism, human trafficking, gangs and organized retail crime. They just gave us some more resources so that we, in the gang unit, we started off in Atlanta, Augusta, and Albany. July 1st, they gave us resources to now be in Columbus, Macon, and Southeast Georgia. I want to see where we can continue to grow. Human trafficking needs some more resources. I'm excited about this organized retail crime. But I'll go back to one of the things that the governor said, and it goes back to my economic development days, that's tort reform. Something needs to be done. It needs to be addressed. There's no doubt that costs are going up. I mean, you're a recovering attorney, and I'm an attorney. The way we handle disputes, we the people set up the judicial branch. So you have to have access to the courts, and I wouldn't deny that at all. But what we now have is we have, a bastardization of the system. We have people that are taking advantage of the system. The governor talked about increased insurance rates, and John King does an unbelievable job fighting for the people of Georgia. We've got increased costs for premises liability. You were talking about advertising. I took my daughter to Disney last year, so it was a year ago May. We're coming up 75. And for those of y'all who are Georgia fans, there was a tragic situation with a lineman named Devin Willock that was killed in a car accident. Here I am coming up 75 last year, and there's a plaintiff's firm that's got Devin Willock's picture on it, and he died 2 years before. We've got an issue that we got to deal with advertising as well. I've been fighting third-party litigation funding. These are groups that are literally, it's dark money. We don't know who's putting money into these groups so that we can find out, so that they can fund litigation. I think we got to focus on that. So common sense solution, it is an economic development issue, and we got to focus on that as well, I think.
Okay, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this because you've mentioned it so many times and I haven't really probed on it. Can you talk about the gangs? What sort of gangs are you seeing? Because, in my mind, from the way I grew up, we were talking Crips and Bloods, but you got MS-13, you've got other Central American gangs that are way more violent than anything we've seen domestically. What sort of gangs are we dealing with?
They're all over state, all races, genders. It's all about making money. It's all about selling guns, drugs, human beings. I tell everybody that the most violent gang that we had, and actually our U.S. attorney, Bobby Christine, was in the Southern District. He had a big bust at the end. But the most violent gang that we'd seen in a while.
The Swifties?
Yeah, it was the Ghost Face Gangsters, which was a white supremacist gang that started in the Cobb County Jail. So it's everybody that's working together. And we just had a big bust in Augusta, too, where, again, you could see, I can't get into all the details, but you had a lot of different groups that were working together. But one of the things that we did, we know that we see fentanyl coming across the border. We know we're seeing gangs come across the border. We seized 15 pounds of fentanyl. That's enough to kill 3.5 million people. So think about this. One operation in one city, in one state, in one nation. Enough fentanyl to kill a third of the population of our state. Think about that. Wow. This is why we have to secure the border. This is why we have to stand up for law enforcement members that we're asking every day to go into harm's way. This is why we got to continue to work together, and why I'm proud of our state to focus on business issues, to be focusing on keeping everybody safe no matter where they live. And I thank the governor and the legislature for doing it.
The Attorney General of the state of Georgia, Chris Carr, thank you. Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you. Appreciate you.